Eala, she's a very dangerous player.
Fans were in shock the moment Alex Eala fell to her knees, crying on center court. But the object that explains what really happened in that second is not on that court, and it is not in her bag.
For someone who grew up in the Philippines and...
It is in a shoebox somewhere in a Manila home, holding a pair of light-up shoes with the batteries long dead and a pair of ruffled socks that no longer fit anyone.
I want to train with brother and my grandfather every day after school with my ruffled socks and my light-up shoes and chubby cheeks.
They belonged to a small girl who ran onto a club court every afternoon after school, carrying a racket that was almost as tall as she was, chasing her older brother through drills and chasing her grandfather's approval through every swing. That girl is now 21 years old. On Saturday, the 4th of July, 2026, on center court at Wimbledon, in front of a crowd that would not sit down, she stepped into a forehand, watched it land, dropped her racket, and fell to her knees on the most famous patch of grass in tennis. She was crying before her body finished falling, and a country of 117 million people, most of whom had never seen a Filipino win a match on that court in the entire open era of the sport, cried with her. The shoes in that shoebox had, in a way, just arrived at Wimbledon. To understand why that moment mattered, why it was so much bigger than one third-round upset, you have to hold two facts in your head at once. The first is that Alex Eala walked into this Wimbledon with a Grand Slam main draw record of 1 win and 5 losses. Before this fortnight, she had never reached the third round of a major. The second is that the woman across the net from her on center court that afternoon was Iga Swiatek, the defending Wimbledon champion, the world number 3, and one of the most decorated players of her generation. There was one more thing, though, that almost nobody outside the coaching circles talked about. The very part of Eala's game that analysts had spent 2 seasons calling her weakness, her slow, spin-heavy lefty serve, was the exact tool she was about to use to solve the champion. The gap between these two players on paper was not a canyon, but it was wide. Eala came in ranked 32 in the world, Swiatek at 3. Eala had beaten Swiatek exactly once in her career, 16 months earlier in Miami, in what most of the tennis press filed as a curiosity, a wild card getting a good day against a distracted number 2. Since then, Swiatek had won Wimbledon. Since then, Eala had accumulated a career that looked, from the right angle, like a promise unfulfilled at the majors. She had made a WTA 250 final at Eastbourne on grass. She had won 2 WTA 125 titles, including Birmingham just 4 weeks before this Wimbledon. She had risen to a career high of number 29 in March. But at the Grand Slams of the 4 tournaments that define a tennis career, she was still statistically a beginner. 1 win in 5 main draw appearances. That is the external tension. The internal tension is harder to see on a scoreboard, because for Eala, walking out onto center court against Swiatek was not just an athletic ask, it was, in her own words, a personal one. It was the girl in ruffled socks and light-up shoes being asked to belong in a place her country had never occupied. The tears at the end of the match were not the tears of someone who had won a tennis match. They were the tears of someone who had finally been allowed to arrive. The first set alone took 84 minutes, which is a small eternity in a 2-set format, and it played like a heavyweight fight. Swiatek broke first for 2-1, punching a forehand pass down the line. Eala broke back immediately, using a tactic that only makes sense if you have studied hours of Swiatek footage, a high moonball return that pulled the Polish champion out of her rhythm, followed by an angled pass off Swiatek's drive volley. Eala broke again for 5-3, walked to the baseline holding her first set point of the match, and watched Swiatek respond the way defending champions do. 3 consecutive forehand winners to escape, then a hold to level at 5-all. It was the sort of comeback that historically breaks the confidence of a lower-ranked opponent. Eala did not break. Into the tie-break they went, and here's where the match tilted quietly, on a detail nobody was watching for. Eala's serve, the attackable serve, kept dying at Swiatek's feet. Swiatek would later say in her own press conference verbatim that Eala's Slow serve was surprisingly difficult to return, and that the slower it got, the harder it became. That admission is worth pausing on. This is the reigning champion in the immediate aftermath of a loss, publicly conceding that a stylistic problem had beaten her. The tiebreak reached 5-2 Eala, then 6-6, then 9-9, then set point Swiatek. Eala saved that one with an unreturned serve. She saved a second when Swiatek netted a forehand, and on her fourth set point of the tiebreak at 11-9, Swiatek mished a forehand long, and Eala took a set from the defending champion in the middle of center court. Something changed in her body after that. You could see it in the second set. And this is the part of the match that professional coaches will study for years. Eala broke to open the set. She held to love with a pair of aces, the same serve everyone had told her was a weakness, now producing free points against a former world number one. She broke again for 3-love. She sat down on the changeover leading 4-love against the defending Wimbledon champion, and for those 20 minutes, Alex Eala was not the underdog. She was simply and uncontestedly the better player on the court. Swiatek was down but not gone. She broke back once to make it 4-2, and then came the last game, which took 6 deuces to close. Take a breath here, because everything after this point is not really about tennis anymore. It is about what happens when a person reaches a place they never truly believed they were allowed to stand in, and then has to close the door behind them before they can let themselves feel it. Eala saved 4 breakback points in that final game. Swiatek hit a backhand winner to save Eala's first match point that would rank among her finest shots of the tournament, but on the third match point, on Eala's own serve, she stepped into a forehand and hit her 24th winner of the day. And when the ball landed, the whole stadium seemed to inhale at once. The final numbers tell you it was not luck. Eala hit 24 winners to 21 unforced errors. Swiatek hit 32 winners to 44 unforced errors. Eala converted 5 of her 7 breakpoints and saved 8 of the 11 she faced. She won 55% of the points behind her second serve. Swiatek won 32% behind hers. That is not a fluke stat line. That is the stat line of a player who studied a champion and out-executed her on the biggest court in the sport. But numbers are not what a country remembers. What a country remembers is what happened in the next 60 seconds. Because when the ball landed and the point ended and the umpire called the score, Eala did not celebrate the way most players do. She dropped her racket. Her hands went to her face. Her knees hit the grass. And in the on-court interview that followed, still shaking, she said the sentence that broke something open in every Filipino living room watching. She said, and this is her exact quote from the Wimbledon transcript, "Maybe for someone like Iga, who's won so many slams, or for someone like Serena or Venus, this achievement may seem small. But for someone who grew up in the Philippines, I went to train with my brother and my grandfather every day after school.
For someone who grew up in the Philippines,
With my ruffled socks and light-up shoes and chubby cheeks, this is everything." And then, before the applause could swallow her, she added, "Because I'm emotional does not mean I'm satisfied. So next round, let's go." To understand why that sentence hit the way it did, you have to meet a man named Bob. Alex Eala called him Lolo Bob. Lolo is the Filipino word for grandfather, and he was, in her own telling to Clay magazine, the reason she picked up a racket at all. He was not a professional coach. He was a club player who loved the game enough to read books about it, watch matches on television for hours, and pass what he had learned on to his grandchildren and his own daughter. He coached Eala's mother in swimming. He coached her brother and her cousins in tennis. He introduced Alex to the sport as a way to bond, as a routine after school, as something a grandfather and a granddaughter could share in the small hours of an ordinary afternoon. In a separate interview republished the same day as her win, Eala said, in her own words, "Every time I do something important, I think of him. He worked so hard and sacrificed so much for me." So when she said the words, "my brother and my grandfather" on center court, she was not reaching for a soundbite. She was naming, in front of the tennis world, the 2 people who had put her there. The tennis world responded in kind. Iga Swiatek's own post-match press conference is worth listening to, because champions rarely give this much away. She said in a quote picked up by multiple outlets including the New York Times, The Athletic, and Tennis Head, "I need to work from the beginning." She acknowledged that Eala's serve had confounded her, and she did it without excuse-making, without asterisks. That is the highest form of validation one professional can offer another, the admission that you have to rebuild your game to solve them. And in February of this year, months before this Wimbledon, Manny Pacquiao himself, the greatest Filipino athlete in the history of Philippine sport, an 8-division world boxing champion, had said this about Eala on ABS-CBN. "I'm so proud of her because she's Filipino and she carries the flag of the Philippines around the world. When I look at her, I say, so we need more of that. Keep it up. Work hard." Read that quote again. Because for a generation of Filipinos who grew up organizing their Sunday mornings around Pacquiao fights, hearing Pacquiao himself say, "We need more of that," about a 21-year-old tennis player is not a small transaction. It is, in the most literal sense, a hand being extended, and the country took the hand. ESPN's Miguel Alfonso Caramoan, writing the day after the win, described what was happening across the Philippines in a way that any Filipino household would immediately recognize. "The Sunday mornings that used to be reserved for Pacquiao's fights," he wrote, "have given way to evenings filled with the same anticipation, millions of people, the same silent country, a different ring. Consider the scale. The Philippines is a nation of approximately 117 million people, spread across more than 7,000 islands, with one of the largest diasporas in the world. Before this week, in the entire open era of tennis, that is since 1968, no Filipino of any gender had won a main draw singles match at Wimbledon. Alex Eala has now won 3 at this Wimbledon alone. She has become the first Filipina to reach the 3rd round of any Grand Slam, and now the first to reach the 2nd week. Her career-high ranking of 29 in March made her the highest-ranked Filipino of any gender in the history of the Women's Tennis Association. And the emotional air apparent to Pacquiao's cultural role, a role no athlete has convincingly filled in a decade, is improbably a 5'8" lefty from Quezon City who came up through the Rafa Nadal Academy on scholarship. There are moments in a country's sporting life when a single result stops being about the sport. This is one of them, which makes it easy to forget that 48 hours before this win, Eala was in real trouble. In the 2nd round against the Australian Maya Joint, a player who had already beaten her once this season, Eala lost the first set 6-3. She looked, for stretches of that opening set, like the player her doubters had described for 2 years. Grand Slam, fragile, talented, but not yet ready. She then won the next 2 sets 6-2, 6-love, in what ESPN called a measure of revenge. That is the sequence you have to hold in your head. First set lost in a match she had lost before at a tournament where her career record was 1-5. 2 days later, on her feet against the defending champion, closing out the biggest win of her life on center court. The distance between those 2 moments is not talent. Talent she has always had. The distance is the willingness to walk back onto the same court after the first set was gone, and to do it again 48 hours later against a more famous opponent. That is not a Cinderella story. That is a working professional executing a plan. So return for a moment to the shoebox, to the light-up shoes with the batteries long dead, to the ruffled socks that no longer fit anyone. Somewhere in a Manila home, they still exist. Probably in a box a mother has been unable to throw out, because parents rarely throw away the shoes of children who grew up to matter. The girl who wore them ran onto a court every afternoon to hit with a grandfather she called Lolo Bob, and she did it for the same reason. Children everywhere pick up a bat or a ball or a racket because someone they loved was on the other side of the net, and it was the best way to be near them. 15 years later, on the 4th of July, 2026, on center court at Wimbledon, that same swing landed the 24th winner of a match against the defending champion of the tournament, and the woman who hit it fell to her knees and cried. It is the same swing. It is the same person. What has changed is the size of the room she is standing in. Iga Swiatek said, in her own presser, "I need to work from the beginning." She meant it about her own game, but it works too as a description of what Alex Eala has just done to a country's sporting imagination. She has made an entire nation want to start from the beginning with her. Later today, at 1:30 in the afternoon London time, she will walk back onto center court to play the number 13 seed, Jasmine Paolini, the 2024 Wimbledon finalist, for a place in her first Grand Slam quarterfinal. Paolini has already told the press she considers Eala dangerous.
She's very dangerous player.
The shoes in that shoebox will not be there, but the girl who wore them will be, one match away from a room that Filipinos in the open era of tennis have never been inside. And whether she wins that match or not, the loop has already closed once. A girl in ruffled socks ran onto a court to play with her grandfather. A woman fell to her knees on the biggest court in the world and thought of him. Same court, same swing, different scale.